No matter what, can we just agree that we should be working in the best interest of the patient? We should work to separate fact from fiction, and we should be able to do so in a safe, efficacious manner.
Some of the largest peptide companies have gone out of business or been told that they need to close their doors through the FDA. They send out a warning letter.
Black market peptides are operating under the ruse of research. 99% of them did no research.
The majority of people buying these peptides that should be purchasing them should be responsible, be on a protocol, not deciding what peptide they need based on some symptom.
Peptides also should not be looked at, in my perspective, as a luxury. I think they should be looked at as a necessity, but you have to know which ones to get and what's the indication for use.
So guys, how you doing? Sidney Gordon here with Core Medical Group. I'm here with a dear friend of mine, Jimmy St. Louis, who I've met a few years back. Absolutely amazing gentleman, very educated in the hormone and health space. And today, just wanted to introduce you guys to him because he's bringing a lot of education during this interview that has to do with what's going on in the United States with our peptides and exactly the do's and don'ts that follow them. So Jimmy, thanks for coming on. Thanks for chatting with us today.
Sid, thanks for having me. Excited to have a good conversation, man.
Absolutely. So Jimmy, can you tell the audience super quick, like what exactly you've been going through for the past year and a half or 2 years to be in the position that you're in, and what the benefits that you've seen from being able to kind of stand at the top of the pyramid?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. It's so excited to have the chance to share here. I think this world that we live in is full of nuances, and I've always believed it's really a matter of how can we meet unmet needs for people in the healthcare space, and oftentimes that means we have to do so with innovative healthcare solutions. For purposes of this conversation, this could be hormone health, it could be peptide therapies, it could be biologics, and that world is oftentimes met with lots of distrust. Most of the time it's met with distrust because people just don't know where to go. And I always have believed that consumers really drive healthcare. When consumers drive healthcare, money follows. And when money follows, sometimes there's going to be good actors and bad actors. So what I really tried to do when I decided to launch our organization was to try to find a way to really determine what means best in class, like what means best in class services. How can we work to frame that up from a regulatory perspective? How can we frame that up from a consumer marketing perspective? And how can you just, frankly, just build trust? And in order to do that, I started to embark down this more legislative route to understand what are they saying there. And what I realized was, as big as I thought our world was from their perspective, it's very, very small. And I could see there was just lots of confusion as to what was going on up there. So I decided to embark on this mission to first just educate policymakers, educate regulators about what good medicine really looks like. And like, no matter what, can we just agree that we should be working in the best interest of the patient? We should work to separate fact from fiction, and we should be able to do so in a safe, efficacious manner. So for me, it was just a matter of networking, building good relationships, leveraging the relationships that I already had from people that actually care about me and care about this mission, align interest, and just work to separate out some fact versus fiction. And so far, so good. Looking forward to sharing some pretty cool news and some things that we've been working on.
So one of the big benefits for me is that, I have an HRT clinic. I've had an HRT clinic for coming up on 17 years. But I've been in the position to where I've been doing what I've been told to do. They take HCG off the market, they take BPC off the market. Then all of a sudden I have to shift my entire patient base. They're very upset because these are all drugs that work really well. You couldn't compound HCG anymore. So those that couldn't afford Pregno couldn't get it. And for the listeners out there, guys, understand that the majority of the HRT clinics, the owners are not in a position that Jimmy is, as being the owner of a very large clinic. He's actually running a clinic and also working on the legislation side, the educational side. So it's very important for someone like myself to understand what's going on and to find it and understand it through Jimmy's hard work is very beneficial, guys. So take this very seriously because I do. And the only benefit, the biggest benefit that I can say is if we're working together and we're working honestly, Jimmy's job is going to be a lot easier, on the front lines. So I'm aware that some of the largest peptide companies have gone out of business or been told that they need to close their doors through the FDA. They sent out a warning letter about 7 months ago, and then we've seen some of the larger companies actually shut down and have these mass closing sales is what they're doing right now. Can you talk a little bit on that?
Sure. So just some quick history. About 2.5 years ago, the FDA decided that there was a large amount of peptides. I think it was about 22 that were considered not safe for compounding. And for whatever reason, as that came out, one can speculate. I think there was some misaligned interest as to what may have led to that ultimate decision and that guidance. So what really took place when compounders said these peptides are not safe for compounding, compounders still followed the money, right? And still they still tried to find ways to produce these peptides. So there were certain regulatory nuances that they tried to work within. One of those was considered research only. So what research only was truly defined to be was for patients who had unmet needs and were looking to pursue other types of more innovative healthcare solutions. They can embark in these organizations that were doing proper research, first around safety, next around efficacy. And those research organizations were tracking data points to build more and more trust. So at some point in time, it can make its way back into the mainstream regulatory framework. For those companies that decided to call themselves research only, 99% of them did no research. They just operated under this mask of research to try to protect themselves. Then it became very, very confusing for the FDA, and the FDA didn't even know where to start. So they had to start to go and send out warning letters to everyone who was doing research and say, are you doing research? Are you not doing research? And they would be given a couple of weeks to respond. But it was so big, the FDA just didn't know where to go with this. So said differently, black market peptides are operating under the ruse of research, and they're not doing proper research. So what's taking place now is because there's been such a fight by the good players like you and I and other ones who just want to do things right, and those compounders who are doing things right, we're fighting on behalf of the rest of the industry to say, just enforce research and put these things back on the bulks list, and let's track and let's do things safely. Let's do things effectively. But for those that are getting shut down, they weren't willing to play ball. They're not going to play ball. They don't have the infrastructure to play ball, and the FDA is saying play ball or stop doing it. So from my perspective, this is a thing of beauty for consumers, because this, going back to what builds trust with healthcare consumers, safety and efficacy, now we're able to actually bring to light those organizations that are doing things so well.
Yes, so there was something which is crazy too, because I just read an article today that not only injectable but oral and pill format, a lot of these peptides are being sold injectable on Alibaba, and some of them are even on Amazon for oral consumption of whatever the peptide could be. As there's not as much threat as injectable, especially on sterility side. A lot of these companies out there, from what I understand, were purchasing these raw materials, compounding them with no batch testing and sterility testing. Would you say that the companies that were using it correctly for the research purpose only were using better quality compounds?
That's typically the case. I mean, there is a large number of organizations that were purchasing from the same place, but the problem is they're still, who knows how they're being compounded. A lot of these were actually being compounded in people's basements. So I would just say, if there's consumers listening, ask, who is the compounder? There's websites you can go to, like there's one called Finric, where you can go to and you can actually see the third-party testing. It's a beautiful thing. So where were they being, or how are they being compounded? Where are they being compounded? What's the third-party batch testing they're doing? What are they doing from a sterility testing perspective as well? Like just making sure they're doing those things correctly. But yeah, I mean, needless to say, some of these more black market peptide companies, you can't really follow the supply chain and even understand where those peptides were coming from.
So now that the consumers, obviously the biggest hit is what the consumer has to understand is the financial side of it. You and I are both purchasing high quality peptides. There's labor that goes into it. There's bottling, there's sterility, there's batch testing. Can you explain to the consumer, number one, why these research companies are so much cheaper versus why what we're doing and why what we're doing is so different?
Sure. So even in the event that a compounder tells you that they're getting their API or their blends, their raw materials from the same place, because that very well could be the case. Then what takes place is the rest of the operations to support the sterility standards, the compounding standards. Those things are not being done properly. So, for example, the organizations that we work with, they follow proper manufacturing guidelines, FDA clear GMP standards. They get their raw materials from the best raw materials providers, but now they have the operational infrastructure to support that third party testing as well. So most organizations are just not following that piece. So even if they get them from the same spot, they compound them. You know, the non-steriles are being compounded in a pill. They're compounding this lyophilized product. They send it out with no testing being done. So just imagine it would. I guess it would be like an oil change for your car, but not really knowing what type of oil is going into it. And so from our perspective, that's where the cost differential really comes into play. So as that raw material comes in, then they're creating their batches. Then they're third party testing their batches for sterility, for purity. They're doing all the things necessary to make sure that these things are 99.9% pure. Without that testing on every single batch, you just don't know what they could have been exposed to. Some of these raw materials could have been produced with batches with other things. Like Sydney, your organization has the opportunity and fortune to treat, say, UFC fighters. If UFC fighters are on FDA cleared substances, but they are being produced and manufactured and compounded in conjunction with HCG and this product and that product, you don't know what's going in. That's a problem. You could have contraindications with the other medications. It becomes a serious issue. So,
Mhm.
needless to say, that the simple way to answer your question is even if they're getting their raw materials from the same place and they're manufacturing them appropriately, if they're not doing third party batch sterility testing, that is actually what's driving down the cost because they don't necessarily have to have the manpower to do the quality assurance things that we as consumers should expect to get from our providers.
What we've seen quite a bit of too is, patients getting educated through our telehealth platform, through our practitioners, and then they go on and they start to research the drugs and they get pricing from us that for BPC or even NAD injectable, all the other drugs, IGF, whatever it could be, and then we speak to them and they say, hey, the drug didn't work at all. It didn't do what it said it was going to do. And we say, well, you didn't buy it from us. Where did you get it? And what we're seeing a lot of is misbranded medication and medication that might not hold up to a batch testing for potency, right? And the big problem there is what it comes down to is you just don't know what you're putting in your body. And I think that that's a big reason why the FDA is really starting to crack down because in our practice, we've had a lot of people calling in with side effects that they've gotten, even to the point to where they're like, yeah, I took a shot of your testosterone and I have hives. Well, what else are you taking? Oh, I got this peptide from, one of these peptide companies. And I was like, well, did you try to stop that? You know,
Yeah.
there's big indications that these drugs are not sterile. And unfortunately, it brings if someone tries a medication and it doesn't work, it then now kind of tarnishes them from moving forward and buying it again because it didn't work. And if they started to buy it in the right place, they would have gotten way better results. What are some of the things a consumer can do? I know you said before, but when they're even buying from a company like myself or yourself, can you explain a little bit more in detail? I know you did touch on it. You can go on and check the branding side, but are there can you still buy from out of country these raws? I mean, are we should we be focused on purchasing the compounds that are made in the United States, all the raws like that? Like what are step by step some of the things that you should be looking for as a consumer in order to ensure you're getting the best medication?
Sure. So I think that the time of this question is really good because I actually had a legislative call today on this. And one of the comments was, why don't we just work to make sure that all raw materials are produced here in the United States? And my question back was, is that feasible? Or does that just sound good? Right. And I think the feasibility of that could be quite challenging. So all of that might be good. What really should take place is third-party testing on raw materials and a standardized process to test raw materials, no matter where it comes from, and it has to meet a standard for it to be compounded, period. That should be piece number one. And then piece number two is the compounder should have to follow traditional, what they call like GMP standard manufacturing good manufacturing process to make sure that they're doing things in a clean environment, in a sterile environment. And then after that, it should be batch tested as well. So now you've got three lines of defense: raw material testing, compounded process, plus batch testing afterwards. And now you've been able to intercept problems along the way. So as consumers, we should arm all of our healthcare consumers with those questions. Ask those questions, and we should give them the tips as to what to look for, right? And so it's, were the raw materials third-party tested? How? Do those meet gold standard? Were these manufactured in a GMP facility? Okay, what is your batch testing process? The problem is, in this world that we live in, money follows. And so then there's got to be, I believe this is where the FDA has to step in and just say, these are the parameters, and here's who gets these FDA certifications or these clear distinctions, because otherwise, you know what will happen? You'll see third-party testing companies pop up everywhere, right?
Everywhere, exactly.
And they'll have their palms greased as opposed to just doing it correctly.
Yeah, one big thing that comes to mind is that when I started in this business, it was a long time ago, and you could compound HGH when I started in this business. Now, obviously, you can't compound it anymore. HCG, very similar. But one thing that's always been very consistent is when there's a pharmacy compounding a genetic testosterone, there's always been a requirement for that to go out to a third party, such as like Eagle Labs. They do their big vat of testosterone. They test different portions of it. It goes out, it comes back, potency level, sterility level. The reason why that's been in place is because testosterone is a controlled substance. Therefore, they're forced to, they should be getting all that testing done. Even though peptides are not in a class of the same as testosterone, we're injecting it inside of our body. Yeah. One thing that I was really blown away by was a gentleman that I met this past week at an event at Founders. And he was talking to me about peptides. And he said, basically, he's been buying peptides from this underground pharmacy, and very wealthy guy, and wasn't even aware that that was bad. Right. Yeah. And I think now that, the publicity is coming out of how bad it is, we are not, the majority of people buying these peptides that should be purchasing them should be responsible, be on a protocol, not deciding what peptide they need based on some symptom. That's why GNC is $1 billion company. You go in there, some heavyset guy that used to work at a Walmart's there selling you everything under the sun because that's what you say you need. Yeah. What are some of the things that people should be taking in mind when they're going to purchase peptides? Like when they feel like they want peptides, what's the difference of wanting them and really needing them? How do you really know what peptides are the best peptides for you and whatever symptoms that you have?
Sure. So I think there's really two routes. There's the more medical route, which means proper diagnostics, get your comprehensive blood work. Let's see what's going on, because even at a minimum, even if you have a preconceived notion of what you want from a peptide perspective, you should at least have a baseline. So like, what does feeling better mean? Okay, does it mean a reduction of inflammation? Does it mean that your gut health is better? Does it mean your testosterone levels are higher, so you're sleeping better, performing better? What are those things that we should be working to measure? And then what are those correlated peptides? But prior to that, I would still believe the gateway is still proper hormone optimization therapy for sure. And I think that's got to be in balance before anything else. We know that's going to help you sleep better, perform better, think better, all those things. But peptides also should not be looked at, in my perspective, as a luxury. I think they should be looked at as a necessity for sure, but you have to know which ones to get and what's the indication for use. So you'll see things like BPC 157. So, BPC 157, great peptide for gut health. So if you have chronic inflammation, it's going to help improve gut health. It's also going to help with repair and with recovery. So if you have sports injuries, if you have normal wear and tear, if you are dealing with some level of chronic pain, that's a great one for you, right? There's other compounds out there like, CJC, tesamorelin. Most of these are typically more performance-based peptides build muscle, recover faster, maintain muscle mass. Those things are all, they may seem like luxuries, but to me, one of the most vital organs you have is your muscle. It's like if you can carry muscle mass, they joke that strong people are typically more useful in general. But aside from that, just the fact that you are able to maintain your muscle mass is going to be an indicator of your longevity. So my perspective is get lab work done first, get a baseline, and let your deficiencies drive the certain peptides that you might need.
Yeah, one other big thing for the consumer that I'm actually pushing out pretty aggressively in my podcast is that when you go to look at a company, don't look at what they're selling, just what they're pushing. If they're just pushing medication, also take the time to look at the types of people that are following that company,
Yeah.
right? If I mean, there's a lot of HRT clinics out there that I could tell you right now that are getting their TRT and their ED stuff through a pharmacy, but they've white labeled their own peptides. So
Yeah.
you get your medication from a pharmacy and then you get from the clinic directly peptides. That's a big no-no. Even though they're a clinic, most likely they're cutting corners to be able to compete with these not for human consumption peptides or the research drugs. So those are some big things that I've seen in the last couple, in the last year. And the reality of it is that if we're gonna get to a place to where the FDA is going to be allowing us to actually open the floodgates, have these peptides available, the people that are abusing that ability are not helping at all, and the consumer is not helping either by purchasing it from those companies.
Right.
So the big important thing here is just know who you're buying from and know what you're supporting. It's
Yeah.
more expensive because we have to operate a business. We have to be licensed in multiple states. We have overhead that's tremendous. It's not some guys that are being paid $10 an hour to pack some boxes and throw some stuff in a box and ship it to your house. So understanding that downline, I think, is very, very effective. Jimmy, so what else do you see coming in the future inside this whole movement that you're involved in so deeply?
Sure. Yeah. So I do have the fortune to spend a lot of time up on the hill, up in DC, and working with policymakers and to some extent regulators on what best in class actually looks like. Some of the things that we're really working on is to help define what best in class looks like from a manufacturing and compounding perspective. I'm very excited about that. That's going to take some work. I think to me, more of the flag in the sand is, can we agree that we should have safe, effective solutions in place and a framework to be able to safely compound peptides, to be able to build trust with consumers, to be able to safely allow physicians and consumers to make good educated decisions. So that to me is piece one, very excited about that. The next is a framework to be able to prescribe those peptides, like I said, safely and effectively, and to be able to do so with some level of data and research on efficacy as well. So part of the thing that I mentioned earlier is like, I really believe that every patient on peptides should have some level of blood work and a baseline and get tested and retested at least 4 times a year with these comprehensive panels to just understand how is your health improving and how is that correlated to peptide usage, if you will. So now we can start to get some efficacy studies in place, because my concern is downstream, whether it be with a new administration or a new head of HHS, there could always be these concerns of, well, I want more research. How do I know you can make those claims? And to me, we've got to leverage this opportunity as the time to say, the time is now to gather that research while conditions are favorable, conditions are moving in that direction. Let's make sure to meet the needs of all the stakeholders, meaning physicians, patients, suppliers, regulators, and policymakers as well. Then the next piece that I do see being put into place here is to be able to have some parameters in place around what should be what I call centralized versus decentralized. Like what belongs in the hands of the FDA and what just belongs in the hands of the practice of medicine, like down at the state level, like state board of pharmacy, board of medicine. Let physicians have some autonomy. Let's not have this single point of failure where there could be all kinds of misaligned interests from a regulatory perspective. I think there's some great nuances and things they should be in charge of. But there's also things that when you put into practical application in medicine, that should take place downstream with the physicians as well. So to me, in summary, the three things: good, good, effective, safe compounding solutions, good parameters in place to advance medicine with peptides. And then three is really distinction between what belongs with the FDA and actually what actually should just take place within the physician's hands.
Well, amazing, Jimmy. Thank you so much. Guys, if you want to have the latest and greatest information on what's going on inside healthcare and the big changes, Jimmy's the guy to follow. His information will be below. And we'll be doing one of these at least a month to keep you guys updated on the changes and what you guys can do to support these changes in a proper manner. So, Jimmy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sid.